Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. My guest tonight is an old friend of Indian languages and my friend, Brian Levy. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. It's very much a pleasure to be here.
Now, Brian is a non-Indian. He's also a non-linguist, at least not professionally credentialed. So why in the world is he on Wordpath? He's not here to pick the languages apart or to talk them to you exactly. You'll soon find out why he's here. Brian cares really passionately about Indian languages, and he contributes in so many ways to the work that needs to be done. Tell us what languages you speak, Brian. Greet us in some language or languages.
Jag skulle kunna börja med svenska. I could start with Swedish. I lived there for 2 years, had a Swedish girlfriend, and learned it through immersion, which is, as we know, the best way to learn languages. I had almost no classes, no textbooks.
And it took you, what, a couple months?
I was fluent within about 7 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
I passed the college entrance exam within 7 months. It can be done.
Yeah.
I had strong motivation.
Motivation is a big part of it.
It's the biggest, yeah.
Immersion rules. So you're good evidence of that.
Yeah. And French, I learned in school, so je peux parler français comme toi.
Oui.
C'est pas un problème. C'est la même chose, mais j'apprenais le français avec les textes, les livres de classe, qu'est-ce qu'on dit?
So you're saying you learned French from textbooks, not by immersion?
No.
Yeah. Still, you managed to get pretty good, but you started very young, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. I started that when I was 4.
Okay.
So if I'd started Swedish with a textbook, I don't know if it would have gone so well. But
right. Yeah. That's wonderful. Well, now, we first met when you called the Intertribal Wordpath Society, or actually, I guess we didn't exist yet. You called me, because you had heard of me working with Indian languages in Oklahoma, to see if there was some volunteer work you could do in connection with Caddo language. And that was, I think, some 6 or 7 years ago now.
Yeah, it was 7 years ago. 7 years ago this summer. Well, 6 years ago. Maybe it was 6. No, it was 7 years ago. That's right.
Yeah. Well, tell us, why were you so interested in the Caddo language in the first place?
Well, it's just the connection of the land. I'm from Caddo Parish, just like there's Caddo County, Oklahoma. I'm from Caddo Parish, Louisiana, and I was just, everything's named Caddo there.
Yeah.
The name, but no one thinks really much about the Caddo or who they are today or that they still have a language. No one. I wouldn't think if you asked most people in Shreveport, Louisiana, where I'm from, that I wouldn't think 1 in 1,000, or 1 in 100,000 would know. Would be able to say for sure that the language is either gone or not gone.
So what if all these other people just think of it as the word Caddo as part of the landscape, like Red Earth in Oklahoma or something?
Right. It's a good name for a coffee company.
Why was it different? Yeah. Why was it different for you? What made you so interested?
I don't know. I had a vision. I mean, I hate to say it, but we were talking about religion earlier, and I just felt called. I mean, you don't have to bring God into it to talk about that. You can just say that my passions tended that way. I love language. I'm a linguophile.
Right.
And these languages are exquisitely beautiful, and it just hit me that they would be, even before I heard them. And when I heard them, it just corroborated that.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
I wouldn't have known.
Well, now, one of the things you did early in the time that you were wanting to help with Caddo is you decided it might be helpful if you got some linguistic training. So you went off to UC Santa Barbara to become a graduate student in linguistics. Tell us a little bit about that.
That seemed like the
and
natural.
How it ended.
That seemed like the natural thing to do, right? I mean, you're supposed to have your little letters after your name, and I was excited about going back to school. It gave me an excuse to stop working. But little did I know what work graduate school would be, and little did I know that most the linguists I met were passionate about language as data, language as a game.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not about people, not about culture, and not about the reality that these languages are all dying while people are sitting around fiddling.
Right.
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm mixing metaphors.
You put that very well, though.
Well, it drove me crazy. They were so passionate. If they put even an eighth of that passion into actually using their expertise, because they're fully trained, which I never got. Because I couldn't deal with, and was not willing to deal with, sitting around trying to prove the latest theory of how grammars work. Not about Caddo or Cherokee or any language, Native American or otherwise, just about how language works. It has its place, believe me. I know you know. There's a passion for that it can be accessed. But I wanted to come here, so I moved here.
So you bailed out on your master's in linguistics.
I did it 1 year.
Moved to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about your work on the Caddo language. How did you get started? What have you been up to these years?
I've tried to just be a facilitator. I've tried to be as helpful as I could and just keep sort of finding ways to work behind the scenes. It's never, I had these grand schemes in the beginning that I alone was going to be able to come save the language. And I mean, that was extremely misguided. I had no idea how hard it was going to be. But what I've found is that you can set these really high goals, and then what you do achieve is still worthwhile, even if it isn't obviously this. The obvious goal will be to pass Caddo on as a living language. To that end, I've helped organize classes, like the ones that are still going on now. I organized those. I sent out the actual letters. I'm trying to get good at being like the Tao talks about, the watercourse way in Chinese philosophy and religion. The notion of not trying to, of leading by not leading, kind of, not trying to do too much. Because I found when I came in and tried to be real aggressive about it, like, I am going to do this, I didn't get anywhere.
Turns people off.
It turns them off big time, and we can talk about that too. I mean, I was branded a money grubber, and the elders wouldn't work with me. Not that I ever came in looking for money or to write a book, but they don't trust non-Native American linguists or language activists like myself.
It's kind of funny. People are so used to others discounting their language and culture that if you don't, you're immediately suspect.
But as you know, you can get past that.
True.
And when you find allies, when you find Indian allies who trust you or me as non-Indian, but as caring very deeply about these languages, or others might be caring about. I'm helping preserve songs too. I mean, I realized at some point to stop making a distinction, because the songs are so exquisitely beautiful. They contain language, and they're being lost too.
Right.
And so we're making, well, when we talk about archiving, I know you're going to ask me about that perhaps at some point.
Yeah.
I'll say more about the archiving work we're doing with the songs.
Okay, so that's the next thing on my little list,
okay.
actually.
Right.
So, in other words, you've been involved in setting up classes so that real people can learn this real language.
The frustrating part of that has been, if I may say, is that it's mostly been adult classes, and obviously to pass the language on living, if there's any hope now, the Caddos are down to maybe 15 speakers, and that's I mean, really fluent speakers, I don't even know that many, and that is horrible. And since I've been working on the language 7 years, at least I'd say 20 fluent speakers have died. Maybe not quite, but I'd say almost half of the number who were living then are already gone now.
Right.
I'm friends with several of the ones who are still around. I've already lost one friend, Clara, who I think we've talked about once before on the show. And anyway,
But then the other side of what you're doing is more archival, that preservation in the archival sense, making tapes of things that are important. Tell us a little bit about that side.
Well, the archiving work is, I always saw that as like the sort of plan B. I mean, if we don't succeed at passing this language on, and the same applies to any other language, not just Native American. I mean, as you know, linguists estimate 4,800 of the 6,000 languages currently spoken will be gone. By the way, I want to make a plug that in Whole Earth magazine, and this issue, there's an incredible. Did you get my email?
No.
Okay, there's a Whole Earth magazine can be accessed on the internet. They have a whole series of articles on dying languages. Michael Krauss, Leanne Hinton, and all of them are interviewed. The people who are really working on it. But yes, the archiving is essential because it will buy us time. Every word that we record, every bit of conversation, every bit of oral history, every song is potentially saved forever.
It's sort of a dilemma, though, isn't it? And I've encountered this in other tribes, too. When you first talked about archiving, you said it's like, well, if this doesn't work, then we have to save things on tape. Of course, you can't wait to see whether the classes work and then say, oh, it's not working. The language is about gone. Now we have to archive. No. You have to be playing both
simultaneously.
Lines simultaneously.
And every tribe needs to be doing it, obviously, now, because some tribes are worse off than the Caddos in numbers of speakers. Some are better off in Oklahoma and elsewhere in the country and in the world.
Right, and like you were saying, about half of the really fluent speakers have died in those last few years, and who knows how many songs and conversations and stories they could have shared and that could have been preserved that there just
breaks
wasn't time
my heart.
to get to.
It breaks my heart when I think about that. I mean, it is maddening.
Yeah, and
to think about.
You can't undo that. But the good part is the things that have been preserved, many of them thanks to you and thanks to people inspired by you and assisted by you in various ways.
And thanks to you.
Okay, so what sorts of things are important to say specifically with regard to Caddo, do you think?
Well, we're really
what's
trying
the way to do it?
To get fluent conversation down. The way to do it is very difficult. It's hard to get people to speak a language that they were punished for speaking as children, that they have no one to speak with anymore, like they live apart from the other speakers, are not necessarily the best of health. And then also at this, as you know, at this stage of language obsolescence, the stage of when a language is unfortunately at the twilight where it could either be gone forever or hopefully saved, a lot of dialects that were once spoken. Like one speaker, one elder at the age of 80 speaks, say, Nachitush dialect of Caddo. Another speaks Hasine dialect of Caddo, and the words are different. You know, one has, for example, the borrowed word for horse, caballo, from caballo or whatever. No, caballo. What was it? Caballo and caballo in Caddo. Right.
Bilabial fricative in Spanish.
Caballo. Sí. And the word in Caddo, the original word was di tama. Okay, so one dialect kept the original word from the Caddo sort of ancient origins. The other borrowed a word, and so actually di tama was taken from dog. I think they weren't horses, right? They probably were dogs, and so I don't know the original etymology, but so yeah, speakers, sometimes there are arguments about you don't talk right. I mean, unfortunately, that can happen because people don't realize that that dialectal differences don't have to be wrong. It can be and.
And also, you said they have different words for things, but the majority of words are not different between
That's
these
true.
dialects.
That's true.
Even though there are some pretty important differences.
But grammatically,
more
they're
of the
not.
language is the same than it's different, and especially in
At least,
grammar.
yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes people make too much of a big deal of that.
Well, we've had definitely troubles with that.
It can trip people up and slow down preservation.
It can trip up the elders sometimes, and it can trip up the younger people.
Right.
And there can be, unfortunately, and I've read about accounts from other tribes too, not just the Caddos, and I know you've seen this too with the Comanches and the Poncas probably. There have been times when, people were ashamed to speak because they're new to speaking.
Right.
And that's true of all languages. I mean, if I was ashamed to make mistakes in Swedish.
And if you have to kind of remember, there's two ways to say this. Gee, which one does this speaker
It can get scary.
prefer? You know, it can give you more of that anxiety as
But
you try to speak.
I guess all I can say is we don't have time for that. I mean,
Right, exactly.
And
That's
I
very well
don't
put.
want to say anything unpopular because again, I am sensitive to the fact that I'm not Indian,
Right.
and I don't feel the right to speak for, nor do I try to speak for Indians. I mean, I'm a Louisiana Jew ethnically. I can't even speak for Jews. I'm not about to speak for Indians, right? But I'm just joking. But I mean, I can't speak Yiddish. I can do the Hava Nagila. But yeah, I'm
but
sorry.
You can schlep to Caddo country with your tape recorder. And
That's right. Which is, now that you mentioned schlepping, speaking of schlepping, this is a digital audio tape recorder.
Tell us a little bit about that,
this
because this is like the instrument of choice these days for field recording of dying languages, right?
Right. I would certainly say so. This is a Sony digital microphone, retail value about $100, power pack. And this is the actual machine. This is a digital audio tape recorder. The tapes look like miniature VCR tapes.
Known as DAT for short, right?
Known as DAT.
Audio tape.
These are incredible. You can get them for about $500 now on the internet. This is virtual reality. When you listen to a tape on this, if a phone rings on the tape, you will go to pick it up.
Right.
If a car
It is
horn
that
honks
real.
outside, you will go see who's there.
Right.
It is as close to is it live or is it Memorex as you could want, and it's not a Memorex. It's Sony.
Right.
It's good. We've had great luck with them. These things will hold up to 4 hours on one little tape. I didn't bring any tapes, unfortunately. I don't have any right now with
They're
me.
smaller than just
but
a
if you can
standard
see on the
cassette,
camera, I don't know if you can. They're about half the size of a regular tape, like an audio cassette. Much better quality. They're digital. They're not analog. And through a digital output on it, you can now do CDs from it. I've been in the process of burning CDs. We have 60 CDs of the Caddo CD collection now, all in digital format. Very high quality sound. Stories in English, in Caddo, a little bit of conversation in Caddo. I want more, a lot more.
This is 60 CDs worth that have been recorded since you began this work?
Actually, only since 2 years ago.
This
when I
doesn't
first
count any of the old tapes that the
No,
tribe already had?
which I might make a plug for now. If any Caddos are watching, please contact Charlene Wright, and of course other tribes. If you have, I'm sure the same would apply in every tribe's case. That there needs to be a I still think in Swedish sometimes. I almost said semling. That's the problem with speaking several languages. No, I'm just kidding. It's not a problem. It's just fun. Don't take me to say that it's a problem. It's not a problem. It's just.
I think it's a wonderful richness.
It's a wonderful richness.
Yeah.
But I was going to say semling in Swedish means that means together.
Assembly or something like that?
Together. There needs to be a calling in of the tapes.
Compiling. Something like
There needs
that,
to be a
yeah.
compiling of tapes. The Caddos, we know that they're individuals who have collections. Those tapes are deteriorating. We're in contact.
Now, I wanted you specifically to talk about that issue because we did have a tape about a show once about archiving, sort of remember to make backups of your tapes and things
that's
of, basic
essential.
things like that. But we haven't talked about, well, what is the shelf life of a tape? And these different media that we're talking about, like a standard cassette versus the
Don't even use
digital
standard
tape
cassettes. That's not.
versus CDs. Give us a little primer on this in just a few minutes, if you can, because I know you're very involved in that issue now.
That's a big issue, and if you care a lot about this material and realize the preciousness of it, kind of like, always when I talk about this, I feel like mentioning that famous crazy linguist guy that you know about, John Harrington. He was in California, and he was madly trying to collect Indian languages back when he saw what was coming, but he had the good fortune of tribes that have long since lost their language still had 100 speakers when he was working with them. And he went out with that primitive recording equipment and recorded on wax discs,
cylinders, right?
wax cylinders, and thank God. Some of the only remaining language material on Chumash is on wax cylinder, and now if you don't think it matters, if anyone happens to be watching, like my relatives who don't realize the importance of this, just thought I'd get that on tape. Why couldn't he be a doctor? Our son, the language activist. I'm joking. Not serious.
But wax cylinders.
Wax cylinders.
Finish that thought, because there's the negative lesson
I
in
want to
that
finish
too.
that.
Some of those having melted when the air conditioning went out in the museums decades later, and they were lost forever.
Yeah. And of course, the Chumash tribe, I was also going to, before I interrupted myself, as I always do and lose my thought, train thereof, my thought, I wanted to say that the Chumash deeply value the work of this white linguist. I don't know how they felt about him at the time. I know he had some informants, as linguists like to call people. Yeah, it's horrible. People who worked with him. But I know now that the tribe, there's a group of Chumash who are using the material to try to resurrect the language. And if Caddo loses the last speaker, which realistically is very possible, and I mean that may be unpopular to say it, but I think at this point there's several Caddos who've said that to me. We can't mince words. There's no mincing words.
If you don't admit the possibility, you'll never do what's necessary to save it. Yeah.
Right, and it's not our fault.
Well, that's another whole issue.
That's a whole other issue.
I agree with you.
But when I say that, what I mean is we don't need to sit around feeling guilty. We need to just do what we can now.
Exactly.
But anyway, yeah, the wax cylinders that the Chumash could have had more of, some of them melted. These things don't have a shelf life. Even CDs or mini discs, that's another format. You can record on miniature CDs, and those are only $200, those mini disc players. They're this small. They're encased in it. These things have a shelf life of maybe 3 to 5 years. They have to be backed up. It's digital. You can see the rainbow colors, perhaps. Where's the camera? There it is. Okay. We like to be humorous today with
Quit playing with those rainbow colors. Now, tell us what their shelf life is only 3 to 5 years?
Yes.
I think
DAT tapes as well.
I think this is really and
maybe
and
5
the larger
years.
CDs also have a limited shelf life.
Unfortunately,
this was a revelation to me and a big disappointment, because
me too.
You order your music CDs from the music company and you assume that they'll last forever, and maybe they will. But that technology is somewhat different than CDs that you record yourself, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
I don't know the exact technological specifications, but when you burn a CD, it has to go through a process called finalizing. I have a Harman Kardon CD player I bought for the Caddo work. It's a CD to CD player. It makes digital copies in 4 times the speed of a regular CD. A 74-minute CD takes 17 minutes. So it's about 1/4 the time. Problem is, after the 3rd generation, it switches to analog. It won't let you copy indefinitely because of copyright laws. For those very CDs you're talking about, the permanent CDs, like you go out and buy a Rolling Stones CD, you can make infinite numbers of copies and just give them to all your friends. No one has to buy the new Rolling Stones CD.
That's what they're trying to avoid by this, making the technology work this way?
Yeah, although I don't quite understand it, because you can make as many copies as you want off the 1st generation. So you can't copy the 2nd generation. You can copy it, but it's an analog, which means it takes the original, it takes real time. So a 74-minute CD is 74 minutes. It's analog, which means I think over time it's not quite as good. It's still very good, and it's still on a CD.
Okay.
But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, these ones that are burned, they, in other words, the ones you record yourself, home burn CDs, like the Caddo CDs, the technology is different, and they don't last forever, and they do have to be backed up. And like I said, because if you back a CD up once, it's still digital, but once you back it up a second time, it's analog. I think what we're going to have to do is back up CD to DAT, from CD to digital audio, then back to CD, back and forth, generation after generation.
So you have to figure out all this stuff, and you have to figure it out in advance. You can't go 10 years later and go, oh, we should have done this 5 years ago.
No, because we got to sit around now and try to salvage the reel-to-reel tapes, those old reel-to-reels from the 60s. The Caddos, my friend Stacy Halfmoon, who is an anthropologist working with the Caddos and has done huge amounts for getting the Caddos language preservation.
And it's Caddo herself.
And it's Caddo herself. And her grandfather, Hubert Halfmoon, was a singer, spoke some language, and made tons of these reel-to-reel tapes, which We are now in the process of getting to the Oklahoma Historical Society, where you and I are going tomorrow, to start the Caddo collection there. They have the equipment and the passion. They're very passionate. I talked to them. They realize what they have. They realize the essentialness of what they're doing. It's important beyond words. It's on the same level or greater than the Holocaust Museum. I hate to make that comparison, but one of my friends the other day was saying, well, you know, people ought to go get more tapes of the Holocaust survivors, because there are always people in England claiming, hey, the Holocaust didn't happen.
Never happened, right?
Right, but get the actual accounts, and they are doing that. And the Holocaust Museum is making DAT tapes. I've been to it in D.C., and it's like virtual reality. You're listening to these survivors, some of whom have died 5 years ago, but being recorded about what they remember. The same thing. I mean, there's just been a Holocaust of sorts here.
Yeah, right. And nothing beats hearing it in their own words.
Nothing.
Especially where language is concerned.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so people should get the best technology possible. DAT recorder for a master is great, but then immediately get it onto CDs and immediately make plans of how you're going to update and back up and recopy those, whatever media you have it on, every few years, to make sure that you don't get the deterioration before you get the next
can't take a
copy.
chance, because that data would be lost forever. Yeah. Digital format can get what's called holes in it. Not actual literal holes, but holes in the sound. DAT tapes, after time, you can be hearing our sentence and said, we were talking, then, you know, or whatever.
And those old reel-to-reel analog tapes you're talking about, every day they're not re-recorded.
They
we
said
risk losing them entirely.
10% risk. And of course, you do that mathematically, you have 10 days, so you better get on it. I mean, that's what the woman at the Historical Society said, was every day that goes by, you possibly lose 10% chance of, I hope she's wrong.
At any rate, it's a real concern.
It's a real concern. Yeah.
And of course, they're very temperature sensitive. And
yeah, and the same applies to analog tapes. All those old regular tapes, like, you know, the kind you have in your car stereo, those need to be copied to digital. Because even though they were done in analog, you want to get them onto a digital format, a CD or a DAT. Because once they're on there, at least they're being kept in the best possible sound holding technology we have.
Right. Now, we've only got 5 minutes left, and I've got several different things to ask you about.
I'm sorry, I'm so long-winded.
No, that's fine. So let me make sure that we talk a little bit about our history with the Wordpath show, though,
yes.
Because a lot of people won't realize that you were basically one of the founders of this show some years back. You were one of the original crew members, and in fact, it was you who stood on the side of the road for take after take after take and shot my little Toyota coming around the bend.
That was a nice camping trip we took to Chickasha National.
Right. Remember, we... recreation area, national recreation area.
That was beautiful. It's cold.
Down around Sulphur. Yes, remember we wanted to go and camp out so we could get great sunrise shots. And then not only was record cold that night, it was October, but it got unusually cold. Colder than we expected to, and it was like 30 degrees.
Yes, it did.
And then we got up and it was overcast, and there were no sunrises.
Froze our camera, yeah.
It froze our camera off, right?
Yeah, as they say in Oklahoma.
So it was quite an adventure, but we basically got it done. It took a couple more trips to get all the buffalo shots, and then we wound up shooting a lot of sunsets.
That was beautiful.
Of course, I've since decided that the difference between a sunset and a sunrise is like one of those philosophical, it's like, depends on how you look at it and what your personality is. It's like some people see a glass as half full and some as half empty.
I agree.
I think our sunsets are actually good sunrise shots.
Yeah, I thought so
But,
too.
you know, we did what we could. We have a little bit of an old interview that we taped just before you left Norman. I guess this was a year or so into the show. Let's show just like about 1 minute of that, because I think you said something on there I'd really like to have people hear.
Okay.
See the situation of Indian languages which are so severely threatened.
Well, it's just I see these. I've seen the languages. The languages are like a living language is like a raging fire, especially English, which is burning up everything else. I mean, they're these enormously energetic living systems, living things, and a dying language that's down to 30 speakers is like the last burning embers of a fire that used to burn so brightly, so much heat given off, so much warmth from it was given off. And when you're down to 30 speakers, you're faced with the possibility of being left with nothing but cold and dust, and if you can't get, there's this need to get things moving, get these embers, to the way you would try to keep alive a fire if that was the last chance you had.
Right. Brian, another special aspect of our history together is that you were in on the very beginning, sort of the birth pains of the Intertribal Wordpath Society. When we had lots of long conversations over my kitchen table, figuring out whether we should try to get some organization off the ground to help preserve Oklahoma Indian languages, and how and when, and coming up with a name and different things like that. So I bounced a lot of ideas off of you, and I want to thank you for that. You left your stamp on that organization as
Thank
well. Now, we're just about out of time, so I thought one last thing we might talk about is that I know you and I have both been to a lot of Caddo language meetings and language classes together. I want you to tell the story about the one where we were we had a language meeting down at Binger, and the rest of us were all there ready to go with our blackboard and our notes and tape recorders, and you and Ranlett Edmonds, Caddo speaker, came in a little late and a little fragrant.
Yes, we were driving on that lovely, I guess the road through either 152 or one of the other, what's the other one?
37?
37. And yes, I'm afraid that my old Oldsmobile, I hit a skunk. And it really did tend to get its last act in before it died, apparently.
It left its mark on
It's left
you.
its mark on the undersides of my car, which seemed to have seeped up onto the undersides and oversides of me and Ranlett, who was singing beautiful Caddo songs. I used to love making that trip with Ranlett. I mean, that was,
yes.
he would always sing songs, and he had such a beautiful voice. We got to class smelling bad. We were in the middle of the class, and Ranlett made this wonderful, he made two good jokes in Caddo. One is the witsi daho ku bit daho daho da'a, which means one onion plus two onions is three onions, which is the difference between daho and daho, where you put a glottal stop in it. But anyway, the other joke he made that night about the skunk, I just want to get that in. I think he did, was the one about, he said, we hit, because the word for skunk in Caddo is we hit.
Yeah. So
which
we
sounds
said,
like
how come you guys think? And he said,
we hit.
very
Which
good.
is very funny. It's like a wonderful meta joke between Caddo
It's like
and English.
a bilingual pun.
Yeah, I was so happy to hear that.
Yeah, we've had some good times together with Caddo language. Well, thanks for coming and joining us. This is like a great kind of reunion for me. Here we are in the 106th show, and you were here from show 1.
Feels good to me, too.
We've got a long history together, and I really appreciate your taking the time on this brief visit to Oklahoma this time to talk with us. And I just want to thank you again.
Thank you.
For everything.
Thank you for everything.
Good night. See you next time on Wordpath.
Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaone kita.